Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. This is Ryne and I am Keith, and today we're going to be talking about how to resource your small group leaders in your youth ministry. So stay tuned. Tell all my leaders this too. I was like, I do care what you do in this ministry, of course. Like, there's a valuable role that you play.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, my biggest concern is that when you leave this ministry, I want you to be closer to Jesus as a result.
Yeah. God's work done in God's way will never work. We'll never let God supply. So it's the same thing. It's like if you feel like you should be doing something, but you don't have the laborers for the harvest, it's like, what's the command? To seek earnestly, to beseech Lord to send workers. And so
it's like, no, like if the Lord's calling us to do something, he's going to provide like people, even out of the woodworks. And sometimes a bold vision like that can bring people out of the woodworks. And because they want to be part of something bigger.
We say it this way: we want to move men by God through prayer. Sometimes we might want to move people out, by God through prayer. Part of empowering them is making sure that you set the expectations on the front side, so that way you can completely unleash them.
Now, Ryne, you have been a youth pastor for a while. I've been a youth pastor for a while, and we have leaders.
We do. Hopefully.
And so one of the big things is like, if you are entrusted with quality leaders, and I was recently reminded that I've got some awesome leaders. I really do. Like, I've had different leaders that I've been concerned about in the past, and there's no concerns with my leaders right now. I am I'd put them up against a lot of other youth ministry leaders.
We should have a fight. Your youth leaders
when you said that, I imagined what is that? Like West Side Story, where they're they're like gangs and they're snapping and they have like little switchblade. Like that kind of fight.
I was thinking something different. But
maybe like a trivia or something?
No, I was thinking like bubble ball or like physical contests.
Yeah.
Things like that.
How about like paintball or airsoft?
Let's do it.
I think
we'll get it set up.
My volunteers, my leaders are pretty scrappy. I think they could win in a fight. Yeah.
We'll see.
Anyways, so we have a small group leaders. We wanted to cover this because I think this is a crucial element. So, you have adult leaders, that may volunteer. Maybe you don't have what you think you need, or you feel like you don't have enough, or maybe you have leaders, but you don't feel like you're really activating them to their fullest potential. So we're going to talk about these things today and just how to set them up for wins. One of the things that I was working on for months that we recently put into our youth ministry mastermind, which if you haven't joined it yet, we have an online community, online community that's really investing in other youth leaders. If you haven't joined, we post all of our free resources inside of that community. You can ask questions. We do monthly trainings. In fact, we have another one coming up here shortly. And so all this different stuff we have within that. So you can click the link in the description, or you can, actually that's how you find out is the link in the description. Yeah, so Youth Ministry Mastermind, go ahead and join today. But what I was bringing that up for is because we just dropped a resource inside of there that I've been working on for months, maybe even years. I don't even know. It felt like I was supposed to put this out. Actually, last year. I was supposed to. I had even mentioned in the community, hey, I'm about to post this, and then cricket for months, and then I finally finished it up, and we rolled it out to our leaders. But it was a leader training guide that we put out for our youth ministry, and I made it into a Canva template, and so if you want that, you can go inside of our community, and it's free. You can modify it to your own liking, but you can kind of see how we trained our youth leaders, which some of them have been former students of ours that have graduated out, and they've stuck around, and they're investing in the next generation as well now. Some of them have been leaders for a long time in our ministry, where they've followed maybe 6th or 7th graders all the way up till they graduate, and then some of them are restarting back in 9th grade or restarting all the way back to middle school. And so we have a longevity in our ministry. So I say all that to say that it's not I feel like we have a good leader base at our youth ministry, that I just wanted to share some of the things that we've done. You can share some helpful things that you've done in your youth ministry that hopefully the listeners can glean from, and not that we have it all figured out, but we're always learning. But some things that we've learned have actually worked out. So I would say, one of the big things, and I believe we talked about this. This might have been way early on, but I learned from a mentor years and years ago about kind of the trifecta of effective leadership of other leaders is expectations, accountability, and relationships. So when you have those three things working together, then you have, kind of a better, healthy relationship, to lead ministry. Now, when one or more of those things are missing, that's when you have issues. So when a youth leader comes to me and says, hey, I'm having these issues, I usually point to one of those three things that I can say, okay, you're missing this aspect, or I'll ask questions surrounding those three questions. So let me explain. So you have expectations. Are you clearly defining what you're expecting of the leader? Mm-hmm. So I had to remind myself of this because we had, some of our leaders that were like not showing up on time, or they would like cancel last second, which kind of left us scrambling. And then I was like, you know what? I may have mentioned this in the past, but I was like, I've never communicated like we have to be here at this time, and you need to give us 48 hours notice before, so we can fill your spot, or whatever, if you can't come. And I was like, that's on me for not communicating that expectation. Now it seems like obvious, whatever, like, it's like, hey, give us a lot of notice, whatever. But I was like, you know what? Like, I need to be more clear. And then it's like, okay, I understand now if, if someone comes up, whatever, that's totally fine. But it was like happening over and over again where our leaders were canceling within an hour of youth group. And I'm like, we gotta make sure that this is an expectation.
Yeah.
So expectation is kind of clearly setting up the expectations of what you expect out of them. Mm-hmm. So do you want them to serve, be there on time for a certain program that you have? Do you expect them to spend time outside of your youth ministry with students? Do you expect them to follow certain boundaries to keep students safe, like digital policy? Do you have expectation? So this comes out through policies. It comes out through different, boundaries that you've put up to, to care for them and also, for the students. Do you expect them to give you any information, like report their attendance every week? And you're frustrated because no one's reporting their attendance. Like, did you ever set that as a clear expectation? Mm-hmm. And then the second part of that is accountability. So if you are expecting them to live a certain lifestyle, one, have you even communicated that? Which a leader training manual, which we've done, like we had like a code of conduct in there. We had what is a win for a small group leader. We had, just like how to effectively lead a small group, so that when, there is an issue, if we're seeing that, we can say, hey, we know that this was an expectation. We even have a leader covenant they signed saying that they understand all these things. So it's not just like, well, I didn't see that. So we have that in writing now just to help set those expectations clear, because without expectations being set clear, then they're confused about what you want from them. Yeah. The accountability to those expectations is if they don't meet up to those expectations and you don't do anything about it or even have a conversation about it, then you're not providing accountability to this expectation. So if the expectation is to come weekly, but they've only come once the past month, then you need to have a conversation with them. That's the accountability aspect. It's like, hey, what's going on? Like, are you still interested in serving? Like, what is the deal? And just helping set that accountability, because if left unchecked, then they don't, they might, just not even follow through with what the expectations are. And then the last part is relational equity, or like relationships with them. So are you only checking in with your leaders because you need something from them? Mm-hmm. That is a clear sign that it's not a very relationally involved relationship. Now, ask them how their week went. Mm-hmm. Ask them how work has been. Like, ask them how their quiet times have been. Like, like shepherd them. Like, in other words, like ask them spiritual questions. Like, hey, what's a passage of scripture that like has meant a lot to you recently? Or, hey, remember before, like you said that your family was going through this. Like, what's the update on that? Like, what so like ask them questions like that. You show them that you care for them. That they're not just a warm body that comes to serve.
A 1 to 6 or a 1 to 8. Yeah.
Yeah, and so those three things working together. If you take out, so for instance, if you don't have expectations but you have accountability in relationship, then you seem like a dictator, because you're just like frustrated all the time with them, and like you're holding them accountable. They're like, what do you actually want from us? Like, if you have expectation and relational involvement but no accountability, then you're a pushover. Yeah. Right. Like, so like they just, there's no accountability, and they don't have any expectation that you're going to hold them accountable to what you've said. And then if you have expectation and accountability, then you're just rude. Like, you're just demanding of them, like to where you're not actually helping them develop as a person and walking with the Lord themselves. So all that to say, those are kind of my three, like, pillars, or, principles, whatever, like that I kind of guide. Like when I see like something's off with the leaders, I ask myself, okay, what's missing from those three? And then how can I adjust accordingly? So you also have quite a lot of youth leaders in your youth ministry, especially as you guys have grown in the past couple of years. You had a requirement that when we had talked before about this, I was like, you might want to loosen that requirement tell us about that, like, and tell us the reasoning behind it, and then how that's worked out for you. So maybe you have youth leaders that are like, trying to kind of restructure things to where it's more effective. But what is the requirement that you had for your youth leaders up until more recently, or do you still have it?
I still have it.
You still have it. Okay.
And it's served well for us. Now, again, with anything else, I'm not going to replace God's judgment with my own. So there's always like flexibility. But what we do is we say, hey, look, if somebody is married, we ask that you serve together in youth ministry. And the reason, there's so many reasons for that. The biggest one to me is like, look, to me, if you volunteer in youth ministry and your spouse does not, that is another night where you guys are away from each other. Yeah. And so we ask our leaders to serve twice a week, like 2 nights a week. And so for you to take 2 nights a week away from your spouse to go serve is like, again, doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that. Doesn't mean there's anything, immoral with that. But just simply, it's like, hey, look, I get so much joy from serving alongside, like, my wife. It's like, I think this is such a great way for couples to grow together. It also provides that, that accountability and that togetherness of like, so many times when you get in the car after youth group, like you're having a conversation about youth group. And if you don't have anybody to talk to about that, then it's like, I'm constantly getting phone calls of, hey, I need to talk about this. Hey, I need to talk about this. And I'm always up for that. That's not what I'm saying. But it just kind of provides that like that sounding board that somebody else gets to talk to. But then also there's longevity in it. Like, when you see that you're something to doing together, all of that is good. But from a kid's perspective, the biggest thing is it helps them see biblical marriages. When most of the kids in our ministry, and I would say most of the kids in any ministry, are not seeing biblical marriages. And what I mean by that is a husband and wife first pursuing God and then pursuing each other. And so I think that's served us well. And at times, there's always been times where I'm like, am I going to have to, look the other way or less? But it's never been something we've written in stone. It's not even in writing. It's just generally, and it doesn't disqualify single people from working in our ministry. It's just, if somebody comes and says, hey, look, I feel called to serve, but my husband or wife doesn't, it's not an automatic no, but it's like, hey, we really love when couples serve together. And it's served us great in so many various things. But I think it goes back to this, is with especially expectations, you can't ratchet them up. Like, you can always lower them if need be, but the call has to be with leaders what it is. And so if you're in a place, and this is really difficult if you've inherited youth leaders, like if you've moved into a youth ministry or various things, inheriting leaders can be very tough. There's a lot of long suffering there and being patient and trying to grow with them. But look, when you're bringing leaders on, part of empowering them is making sure that you set the expectations on the front side, so that way you can completely unleash them. And I think that's ultimately what we want to get to is we want to resource them, we want to train them, we want to do all these things so that we can so we can unleash them. Because as you said, and I'm in the same spot, we have 12 volunteer leaders who serve weekly in our ministry. It's like, I don't have to worry about any of them. It's like I can throw any of them in a small group and say they got it, and I don't need to come behind, and I don't need to have questions afterwards like, hey, did anything come up? Like, hey, I need to. It's like they're good.
Something weird. Or,
and so that's what's really, really great is when you can truly unleash them. That's when you're multiplied. What can really be difficult is when you can't really unleash them. Then you don't feel like that multiplication is really happening. Yeah. So for instance, we have 12 small groups that happen on a weekly basis. It's like, I don't have to, I just know that they're just going to do what they're asked to do, and that it's going to happen. And each small group is going to take on its own flavor and the personality of their youth leader, and all that's going to be different. I encourage that. All your groups are different because all of you are different. But just really understanding, it's like, when I unleash them, I have to truly unleash. But where I think we frustrate leaders a lot of times is when we say we're going to unleash you to do things, and then we're like, okay, but I didn't really like how you did that because it's not the way that I would have done it. And so I think part of that expectation is understanding that. But I think calling them to more, as we talk about with students, never go wrong with leaders, because the ones who are high capacity will want that. And I think you'll lose them if they get bored serving in your ministry if you're not challenging them to more.
Now, let's talk about people that you mentioned they might have inherited leaders, or for whatever reason, they have leaders right now in their ministry that they do not prefer to have.
Yeah.
So they're for various reasons. But they know that if they ask them to step down, they're not going to have, like, it might require more work, for them.
Yeah.
Or they don't have someone to backfill, like into that certain role or whatever. What are some things that you would recommend in that situation?
Number one, sounds trite, but pray. Pray that God would move
for the
them.
Lord, to
Pray that
the
God
harvest.
would change their heart, or He would move them. All various things is a huge way. It starts with prayer, and we want to. We say it this way: we want to move men by God through prayer. Sometimes we might want to move people out, by God through prayer. But that's a huge way. It's just starting in prayer, and then the second thing is having that clear conversation of so you haven't been doing what we've been asking. Like, you don't want to approach it that way, but just say, hey, here's where we're trying to do, and see where they're at with that, because sometimes it might be a failure on our part, and through that conversation we might realize that, or they might just open up and be like, honestly, right now, like, we're struggling with this, and then that kind of gives you a door in to just kind of be like, hey, well, let's take care of this first, and let's not worry about this. And so I think if you pray and if you care for people, most reasonable people, it'll resolve itself. Now, if you get somebody whose identity is kind of tied up in this, which is a danger in any, volunteering aspect, serving in ministry, then it can get to be pretty difficult. And that's where having clear expectations is your best friend, and that accountability. So I would say pray. I would say, obviously if somebody has disqualified themselves, I don't care how much work they need to go. But if somebody's in that, hey, we need more out of them. My best thing is always, I've learned, and it doesn't work for everything, but primarily the source of most of my problems, the best way to solve them is to outgrow them. And so if I can train up enough leaders, now all of a sudden, hey, it's not really an issue anymore, because now we have the freedom to say, hey, look, we've given you enough chances.
Well, and also, I know there's a tendency to think of like a scarcity, where it's like, well, there's only so many leaders that we can have in our church, whatever. Like, and if they leave, then we don't have anybody. And so I get that
dangerous places.
And that's where, like, you are what you tolerate. And so I think if you tolerate too long, so I would say, to not approach it like that, like as far as a need base, but to say, what is the Lord asking me to do? Like, what would be the right thing in this situation? Like, is there a clash or disagreement in philosophy, or is it like a sin issue? Like, of course, if it's a sin issue, like that's a lot more obvious, because it's not like you're causing them. Like, they've made a decision, or they've made decisions to live in a certain way that would disqualify them. But when it comes to a philosophy clash, so my mentality, and this has served us well, like, we've never really been super short on leaders, because it's like, okay, what is God calling us to do? And then, He'll provide the people to do that. And so we're never like begging people to join, it's like, or like even an approach like this, where it's like, we have this many leaders, what can we do? It's like, no, like, if the Lord's calling us to do something, He's going to provide, like, people even out of the woodworks. And sometimes a bold vision like that can bring people out of the woodworks, and because they want to be part of something bigger.
Well, what was crazy to me, we have a lot of off-camera conversations about a lot of different things. We spend a lot of time. We talk a lot about like finances and things like that and stuff like that. And we joke sometimes about Dave Ramsey and like how to go back and forth. But Dave said something that was so simple, but I was like, if we just told people this, like, from a church with finances, like, it would change everything. He goes, I just always kind of figured if God didn't give me the money, He didn't want me to buy it. And so it was kind of like, that is so simple and so true, but I've never thought about it that way. It's
there's like that. Have you seen that SNL spoof of that, where they're like, it's this new like this amazing program where it just teaches you like how to, live financially free. And it was like, the name of it was like, if you don't have the money, do not buy it. And the family was like, so what if we can't afford it? Should we buy it still? And they're like, no.
But just thinking now, like, it kind of ties back to that one quote, who I'm blanking on the name, but he says, God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supply. So it's the same thing. It's like, if you feel like you should be doing something, but you don't have the laborers for the harvest, it's like, what's the command? To seek earnestly, to beseech, for the Lord to send workers. And so I think we need to start there, starting and saying, we're going to do this, and be like, well, we don't have any leaders. It's like, start with like, okay, based on what God has given you, what do you think He's calling you to do? And then you have to have that vision too, to say, okay, but we also know God's calling us to this. Now we got to go find people to join.
And also you have like sometimes a leadership problem, like a quote problem, can reveal a leadership problem within yourself.
Yes.
Like, where it's like, okay, is it really their fault? Like, or is it me not leading them in a certain way that would, be beneficial towards, us moving together in unity? And so I think this is where it comes up to the next one is, like, I've always had the mentality, and I tell all my leaders this too. I was like, I do care what you do in this ministry, of course. Like, there's a valuable role that you play. But at the end of the day, my biggest concern is that when you leave this ministry one day, it's like we can't expect to serve. You're going to serve here for the rest of your life. Like, I mean, maybe, but like, but when you do, like, whatever you do here, I want you to be closer to Jesus as a result.
Yeah.
And so because of that, like, if that's my main goal, like, not to just get them to, be a warm body so we can have a good ratio of leaders versus students. I was like, I want them to be growing in their relationship with the Lord, because if you can get them spiritually growing, they're going to be a better leader
100%.
to students, because they can only go as far, they can only take students as far as they've gone spiritually. And so that's why, like, when we get together, when we have trainings, like, I'm really trying to resource them to becoming better followers of Jesus. So like books that I'll get are like, commentaries for them, or like, things that'll help them in their devotional life. Like those are key ways that I, to resource them, but challenge them to keep learning themselves. Like, and caring for them spiritually, because they're having issues, they're having like questions, they're having, different things that are going through their brain too, like doubts and all that stuff. So just care for them in such a way that they're closer to Jesus as a result of being in your ministry. And what I've seen is that just breeds like incredible loyalty to the ministry, because they're like, I wouldn't be the same if I didn't serve here.
Yes.
Like, and to really focus on that aspect.
Well, and it becomes their community. It becomes their small group. And it really, that's how I feel. It's like, somebody was like, well, aren't you in a small group? I'm like, yeah, it's our youth leaders. Like, we're doing ministry together, and, nothing builds relationships faster than serving. Yeah. And so it's been really cool to see. And then, there's that longevity, when I know that you care about me. I'm not just a means to an end. Yep. There's a longevity that this is a place where I'm invested, and this is a place where my community comes from. Yep. And I've seen that really work well in terms of the longevity of the leaders that we've worked with. Yeah. And there's so many things that go into that, but maybe talk practically in the last, little bit we have. So we've kind of talked like philosophically about expectations, accountability, relationships. We've talked about making sure that you truly are unleashing people, and not unleashing people, but then holding them back. We've talked about setting that bar high, or learning. What if somebody has a small group environment, which most youth groups do, and so they're working with small group leaders. You said you talked about what is a win for a small group leader. Yeah. So would you mind sharing that a little bit with us as listeners, and be like, okay, how would you define a win for a small group leader, or how would you go about making sure that a small group leader knows exactly what you want to get out of them, and how to do that? What does that look like for you guys in your ministry?
I'll just read it. I mean, I have the booklet that, again, you can get the free Canva template in our youth ministry mastermind. But what I just say is our win, so I think of our wins as like, our finish line. Like, what are the goals that we have? What does it mean to succeed? And so we have 3 words that we use, to know, grow, show. So we have, knowing, know, when students come to a knowledge of the truth of the gospel and place their faith in Christ, that's a win. Like, First Timothy 2:4 tells us that God desires all people to be saved, to come to a knowledge of the truth. So there's a connection there with someone starting a relationship with Jesus and knowing him personally. Jesus said, like, at the end, like, there's going to be people that will say, like, I did all these things for you, but he said, depart from me, because I did not know you. Yeah. And so we want students to know Jesus. So if a student comes to know Jesus, that is a win. Like, we're going to celebrate that. Like, we're going to be excited about it. And so we want them to be leading people to the Lord. Grow. So we win when students grow in the likeness of Jesus. So 2 Peter 3:18 says to grow in the grace of knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. So that comes out to play in different ways. Like, so when a student learns, their testimony and how they can, be more like Jesus and sharing the gospel with other people. We use the 4-chair discipleship strategy, as we've talked about before. So seeker, believer, worker, disciple maker. We're tracking progress in that kind of roadmap, not just a consumeristic like menu of like pick and choose whatever you want and then see how that goes. Like, we're walking students through a known growth process. And then show is like, we win when students are advancing the gospel to the lost around them. So we're tracking gospel conversations. So part of every small group that we have, the first question, who can share a story from this past week about how they shared the gospel? Ask it every week, even if no one responds. The leaders should be leading by example and having a story ready just in case, the students are also sharing, even if students, but we going through, so we win when students are literally sharing the gospel and showing other people Jesus. So, and we use the call circle as well, which is, prayer prayer, care, share. So, are they praying for the lost? Are they caring for them? And are they sharing the gospel with them? So, yeah, so that's kind of the basics of like, we win when students are knowing Jesus, when they're growing in the relationship with the Lord, when they're sharing the gospel, when they're showing him to other people. And then specifically, like, I said, like, I even outlined in our booklet about expectations for our leaders, like just on how to lead a small group. And really, so there's like, that's like the overarching philosophy. It's like the no grow show is what we use, whatever. But you might have different words, you might have different like things, whatever. But at the end of the day, like, okay, practically, like they lead a small group on a Wednesday night or a Sunday night or whenever what does it mean to like what does a successful small group look like?
Yeah.
Okay. So the biggest thing for me is don't talk too much.
Yeah.
Ask questions and then get them to talk, because a lot of the students are very open to talking. But oftentimes, like, I think when leaders aren't succeeding in connecting with students or getting them, like participating, it's because they teach too much. Like they'll just talk the whole time, and then students, it's like an afterthought to ask students questions. Or they ask a question and then they wait like one Mississippi and then answer the question for them or move on, because they're so deathly afraid of awkward silence.
Yeah.
And so what awkward silence does is it communicates, hey, we're expecting you to answer this.
Yeah.
And it's like that, like there's an alarm going off in their brain whenever you hear silence. Like it's like, and you've seen like in kids' faces where they're like, oh snap, like I think I'm supposed to say something. And then you might have to repeat the question again because they weren't listening, or they're getting zoned out or whatever. So yeah, that's our big thing for, like what a successful small group, like it's a facilitation of discussion. It's not necessarily teaching, because that's our structure. So we have a large group teaching and then they break up into small groups. Yeah. And so during that small group, we're like, we have questions for them to engage with the topic and, with the passage. And so if the teacher is just teaching, or if the leader is just teaching another lesson, it's like, you missed the point. Like, we've already taught the lesson. Just help us to, nail down those truths.
Yeah. Last thing I would say for me, as youth pastors and youth leaders, one way to empower and unleash and equip your small group leaders is to give them the material ahead of time.
What?
It's
how ahead of time? Because this could be I don't know. Sometimes I wrestle with.
I try and give them 2 nights to look at it.
2 nights.
So I try, and like if we meet on Wednesday, I try to give it to them Monday.
Yeah.
Okay. Now sometimes that's not possible. So sometimes it is Tuesday, but I make sure it's Tuesday during the day. So like at night so they have the ability, because I think so many times, especially when we're going into, like, we did a study of 1 John. And when I went into 1 John, I was like, I know 1 John. And then when I started studying it, I was like, oh man, like there's a lot. And I mean, that's true with like all scripture, but I was like, so I would literally send our leaders ahead of time. And 1 John 1's like, hey, here's what we're going to talk about. Here's the questions. But then when we got in like 1 John 3 and like 1 John 4, I would say, okay, hold on, time out. Like there is a lot here. You need to specifically, I would encourage you to study this verse specifically, and here's a resource on that. Or, hey, look closer into the context of this, and here's a resource on that. And so not just giving them the discussion guide and say, I hope you can lead a good discussion, but like, hey, here's the things, we talk about, like, we always want to have more under the table than we present on the table. I don't want to tell you everything I know. It's like, I always want to have some stuff back and say, here's what we're going to talk about. Because then if a kid asks a question, we can go deeper with them and be prepared in that. So making sure they have the materials ahead of time is a huge way, and your leaders will be very thankful for that.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And so, just to go over the 5 how-tos just real quick, I'm not going to go into detail, but just this is what we teach our small group leaders is remember that's a journey. So just remember that, like, it's obviously not going to be overnight, like, like everybody's like, wow, that was amazing. So, it can be a progression. Facilitate conversation. Focus on chair growth. So we talk about that, and just like identifying students where they are, and then also helping them to move to that next chair. Building relationships. And we have a quote that says time equals traction. So like the more time you get to spend with students, the more influence you'll have in their life.
Absolutely.
And then the last one is lead yourself. So it's like, make sure that you're coming prayed up and learning from God's word before you come to teach or come to lead a discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Did you have anything else to add?
I think that's
All
it.
right, well, head over to our Youth Ministry Mastermind if you haven't joined. We are excited to have some things coming down the pipeline for more resources with you guys. So make sure you're not missing them inside there. If you are not subscribed on YouTube, please make sure that you subscribe. Most of our viewers are not subscribed on YouTube, which is
shame.
There's like a lone tear that floats down my face every time I see that.
Be careful getting a tear.
And, yeah, and so when it comes to subscribing, make sure that you guys are subscribed so that you don't miss a future episode. So stay tuned for the next one. We'll see you then.